everyone. Welcome to your episode 319 of the At Percussion podcast. My name is Ben Charles, and with me, as always, are my lovely co-hosts, Caleb Pickering.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, doing well. How's your mid-semester going, Caleb?
It's getting to that point where you can tell the students are ready for spring break, and you can tell the faculty's ready for spring break, and everyone's
And the
just
faculty.
hanging in there.
And Ksenija Komljenović,
Hey Ben, great to see you again.
good to see you. How's your Sejourné practicing going?
It's tough, but I'm really excited. I'm really excited to get to play this with your
Ksenia is going to be a guest with my students later this semester. She's going to play the Sejourné Suite for Marimba and Percussion Quartet. And, of course, as always, Karli Viña.
Hey, Ben.
Hey, Karli, how's your mid-semester going?
It feels like a treadmill that keeps speeding up and speeding up and speeding up. And but we're all just like barely hanging on, and spring break is still 2 weeks away. But by the time this episode airs, we'll be right on the cusp of spring break.
It's funny hearing you guys talking about spring break, because here we had like half a week off for snow, we had a week off for Team EA, and we had another half week off for snow. And our spring break is next week, so I'm actually dreading it. I just want to have a normal week for once. And we're hosting John Mackey for our band invitational right now. So this week is also just not normal either. So, well, if you're listening to this episode on release day, it is being released on March 10th. Karli, what happened in music history on March 10th?
Yeah, a couple of cool things. This first one is probably cooler for me than for maybe the rest of you, because I'm a huge Simon and Garfunkel fan. But on March 10th, 1964, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel recorded The Sounds of Silence, the famous song. They recorded it acoustically, actually. And later, the record company producers added the electric guitar, the bass, and the drums without letting Simon and Garfunkel know. But I'm sure that those things were part of what made it such a big hit in 1965. So that's kind of cool and interesting if you're a Simon and Garfunkel fan. Here's another one. March 10th, 1994 is the birthday of Bad Bunny, who is the Puerto Rican rapper and singer-songwriter, for anyone who might be interested. But the big thing I wanted to talk about today is March 10th, 1944 is actually David Friedman's birthday. So we're all probably pretty familiar with David Friedman. But just in case we're not, he's a very well-known vibraphone player. He has worked with a huge, wide variety of musicians spanning genres and styles and decades, including Leonard Bernstein, Luciano Berio, Bobby McFerrin, Wayne Shorter, Yoko Ono, and the list goes on and on and on. And you can read his recording credits online. But a little bit of his background: David Friedman was born in New York City on March 10th, 1944, and he was really interested in studying drums when he was young. Here's a quote from Friedman. He said, "My parents had a good friend, Jerry Jerome, who used to play saxophone with Benny Goodman. When I wanted to study drums, Jerry recommended Stanley Krell, who was a Broadway show drummer in New York, who became my first drum teacher and mentor. He insisted that I became classically trained, so I studied xylophone and marimba, which I did not want to do." He graduated from high school in 1962 and decided, okay, I think I want to study percussion. And he said, "I heard that Juilliard was the best school, so that was the only school I applied to." And then he goes on. These quotes, by the way, are from an article on the PAS website written by Lauren Vogelweiss, and it's super cool. It was the feature on Double Image when they were inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2015. And so of his Juilliard audition, David Friedman says, Music Minus One records came out, and so I used one of those minus the violin player to practice. And when I took my audition, I played the Bach Concerto in A minor with the record, and people were totally knocked out by it because no one had ever done that before. So just imagine, like, the first person to play the Bach Concerto in A minor, the violin concerto, along with the track, and it was just super cool. So he got a scholarship to Juilliard for that. During his first 3 years at Juilliard, Friedman studied keyboard percussion with Morris Goldenberg and studied timpani with Saul Goodman. And he says one of the best things that Mo, he means Goldenberg, did for me when he realized I was interested in jazz was send me to study vibes with Teddy Charles, who had played with Miles Davis. He says it takes a forward-thinking teacher to do something like that. Then he says, and Saul was a great musician as well and a very good friend and musical inspiration. So Friedman graduated with a bachelor's and master's in percussion from Juilliard. While he was still a student there, he started freelancing. He, starting at age 20, was subbing with the Metropolitan Opera, with the New York City Ballet, with the New York Philharmonic. And then he was also getting hired to do like jingle recording from his former teacher, which he said made his sight reading much better. Friedman was teaching at the Manhattan School of Music in New York before he moved to Germany. And when he moved to Germany, he founded the jazz program at Berlin's University Arts. And then he served as its head for 16 years. And as of the publishing of this article in 2015, he was retired from being the head of the department, but still teaching vibraphone lessons, still coaching ensembles. He's also the author of the really famous, wonderful book that I wish I knew about earlier in my learning than I did, but the book is Vibraphone Technique, Dampening and Pedaling. And of course, one of David Friedman's most well-known musical projects was his collaboration with Dave Samuels. The two formed a duo that originally they called it the Mallet Duo in 1975. And in 1977, they expanded it into a quartet that was called Double Image that was very, very famous. And they added to the group for the quartet, Harvey Schwartz on bass and Michael DePasqua on drums. And I mentioned there's a really nice article on the PAS website by Lauren Vogel-Weiss. You should check it out if you're interested. So I'll share a little bit about Double Image and their origins and kind of reception. So the story goes that David Friedman met Dave Samuels during a visit to Boston in 1973, and the two just kind of instantly connected, both personally and musically. So Friedman says, in terms of percussion, the marimba vibraphone combination is the unique and totally complete chamber music formation. You have rhythm, harmony, form, melody, everything that an ensemble should have. With these two instruments, you have an entire orchestra at your fingertips. We were the very first to do that. It's a fantastic combination. You have the warmth and range of the marimba plus the clarity of the vibraphone, yet it's a typically percussion chamber music combination. So it's interesting to think, like, I actually didn't realize that they were the first to do this combination because there's so much repertoire for it now. Ruth Underwood, who is known for her work with Frank Zappa, she spoke about Double Image and David Friedman, and she said, I first met David Friedman when we were both students at Juilliard. He was a stunningly gifted vibraphonist and composer with a refreshingly broad musical reach. I had the pleasure of meeting Dave Samuels about 10 years later and was similarly impressed by his unique musical voice. And Underwood and Samuels later played together on the Frank Zappa recording Live in New York in 1976. Gordon Stout was present for one of the first Double Image performances at the Eastman School of Music. And of that concert, he said, the memory of that event is ever present in my mind to this day because I had no idea that the mallet duo as a genre existed at all, and certainly not at the level they presented. Their music was simply mind-blowing at that stage of my musical development. And then one more quote this one's from Lee Howard Stevens. And Stevens says, Double Image virtually invented the genre of the marimba and vibe duo, as well as modern mallet jazz, and their creative compositions and electrifying performances continue to motivate and inspire audiences. Further, their performing and recording legacy will surely be valued by generations of future percussionists. So Double Image, they performed together for over 40 years. Sadly, it was cut short by the death of Dave Samuels in 2019, but they leave behind such a huge, vast, wonderful legacy in the percussion and music worlds. And as I mentioned, they were inducted into the PAS Hall of Fame in 2015. So go listen to some David Friedman recordings today if you want to celebrate his 78th birthday.
Yeah, David Friedman, I've never met him personally, but in addition to being an amazing musician, also seems like such a kind, wonderful person. And he posted, when Dave Samuels passed, he posted some photos from one of their last visits, and it was just like two old friends hanging out. It was so sweet to see. And then also, I wish that I wasn't retelling this story, but Kashka had a great story about, he wrote a piece called Between Dusk and Dawn. It's a marimba chorale for Kashka. And I guess they got together and she was playing it for him. And I don't know, she made a comment or he made a comment or something, but he just ripped the score up into shreds. And she's like, oh, no, I didn't dislike the piece. He's like, no, I'm just joking. That wasn't my original copy. So it seems like a very kind, fun person to be around. And as Karli mentioned, Double Image, we're certainly one of the first people to establish a very unique artistic identity. And this will be a great segue into our guest today as someone that I think of as having established a very unique artistic image himself. So our guest today is Jason Treuting. He's a founding member of Sō Percussion. He teaches in various capacities at Princeton University and Bard College. He's an amazing composer of very original works and has collaborated with many brilliant musicians, including Steve Reich, Julia Wolf, David Lang, and Paul Lansky. So welcome to the podcast, Jason Treuting.
Hey, thank you. And that was an amazing segue. And an amazing, I learned so much about Double Image. That's really remarkable. Thank you for that, Karli.
Hey, of course.
Well,
Pleasure.
Jason, since you are a founding member of Sō Percussion, which is now in its 23rd year, I wanted to talk a little bit about the inception of Sō. And I heard through the grapevine, Sō was formed something, from what I understand, around the composition of David Lang's The So-Called Laws of Nature. So could you tell us a bit about the history of forming Sō? What was the original artistic vision, and how do you feel like it's changed over time? And when you started also, how did you feel that your group would be unique and carry the artistic torch from established groups like Nexus, Percussion Group Cincinnati, and Amadinda?
Yeah, we were basically founded around David Lang's piece, though not exactly. I guess that piece was written in 2001. So came together. It was kind of a grad school thing. So I got to grad school in 1999. I went to the Yale School of Music, and the four of us at the time, it was basically like got there, we're signed to play some music together. It was some pretty hard music, and we spent a lot of time playing it together, and just kind of grew pretty tight through that. You know, as I've been kind of retelling this recently and thinking more about the huge bag of peanuts in the corner of the studio, and we would rehearse late into the night, and we would eat the peanuts like that had the shells. So we would we would like have to shell the peanuts and just throw them into tin cans on the floor. And what I remember is just the overflowing shells coming out of the tin cans and the insects that gathered around those shells. As much as I remember the music that we were playing, it was just like we really loved playing together. You know, so the first 2 years were mostly that. I'm not sure that we had a name until maybe a year in. But then, yeah, the first kind of bigger commission we did, we were founded to play contemporary, you know, new pieces. You know, we wanted to get new pieces written for a percussion quartet. I mean, it's funny to think about it now. There's definitely tons of wonderful music in the lineage, but it was lots of small, you know, short pieces of music. And we were at Yale School of Music, and so these string quartets would come in playing just massive works, and we would feel like we would love to play some massive works too. And so we started to commission with that in mind. And David was the first kind of composer that we reached out to that we didn't know. It was kind of a stretch goal. You know, it was like, who could we think to commission? We had a small pile of money. One of the guys in the group got a fellowship or a Presser grant, I guess. It was kind of like an award. We thought we were going to commission 3 pieces for that amount of money. This is like early days of the internet. So like we guessed David's email address. I remember guessing every possible email address for David Lang, you know, d.lang, david.l, you know, d_lang, you know, just like how many, you know, and it was amazing. We would run down to the computer lab, and then, you know, finally one day, you know, weeks in, he emailed back. But
how many other David Langs emailed you?
I know. No, 0 other David Langs, and he is such the sweetest guy. But his email address at that time, the first part of it came back as Modern Pain, and I think it was short for Modern Painters. Like he had written an opera that was Modern Painters, but we just saw Modern Pain. It was like, oh my god. You know, this hardcore New York composer, super edgy. Like we were like kind of scared of him, you know. And I got him on the phone, and he explained that this amount of money, he very sweetly explained that this amount of money was too small to commission a 10-minute piece. But if he wrote us a 35-minute piece and we promised to work our butts off on it, he would go for that. It was like if you meet David, it turns out it makes a lot of sense. He goes big. But that really kind of set the trajectory, I think. And Ben, there were so many wonderful parts to your question, so I'm not sure which parts I just hit and which parts I didn't, but you mentioned some of the other awesome percussion group, Percussion Group Cincinnati, Nexus, Amadinda. I mean, I remember reaching out to Chromata, checking out Strasbourg recordings, for us, Nexus was really, well, for us, I guess Nexus and Percussion Group Cincinnati as well were two of the big ones. They were, American or North American groups. Doug Perkins was in the group at the time and studied in Cincinnati. So, they were kind of heavy for him. And Nexus was just kind of heavy for all of us. I went to Eastman undergrad, and so there was a strong kind of stamp from Nexus there. So early on, we reached out to them to kind of ask questions, but we very clearly wanted to differentiate ourselves from them, not because we didn't love what they did, but just because you don't need another Nexus, right? Like, who would come see us if we were doing the same thing? So we were pretty clear about the fact that we weren't gonna play ragtime, there's no reason for us to do that. It's like Bob Becker's, we weren't gonna improvise, we weren't gonna we didn't really have strong ties to kind of rich world traditions like they did, Bob Becker and the tabla, or Russell and Western, West African Ghanaian music, so we were pretty clearly not going to do those things. And in fact, we pretty immaturely said, we are not improvising, we're not writing our own music, and what we said at the time was really silly. We said, we're not playing hand drums, which I think to us meant we're not going to get on stage and do things that we don't really know how to do well, because there's such a rich tradition to those instruments that we don't know. I think we broke all those rules pretty solidly over the last 20 years, but that was the inkling. And as far as how it's changed, I think I wouldn't say to folks starting a group right now that starting off with a mission of what you don't do is very smart. Like that feels pretty negative. You know what I mean? It feels like there's a more positive way to create something. But I think we were pretty clear about what we did. We commissioned new things, and that's what we did for a long time. And I think we've just slowly started to embrace, as other folks joined the group, I think started to embrace the different things that people did. So it was pretty long in the game until I started to compose, and that became a thing that was okay to do in Sō Percussion. Even the drum set, I love playing drum set. That's my main instrument, and that was never something I would do in Sō for a solid 5, maybe 10 years. It was just something that was outside. When Josh joined the group, he has a kind of rich, tradition and history in the pan community, and goes down to Trinidad every year and has for a long time. So that's become a part of what we do. We tried to open up to the new influences, I think, but we started off in a very negative space, and hopefully we've moved in a more kind of positive, bring it on kind of space.
That's awesome. What do you remember a moment when you felt like, all right, this is serious, we're gonna do this for real, and we're actually even gonna be able to not only spend money doing this, but maybe even make a little bit of money doing this?
Yeah, I wish I remembered the moment. I remember a few moments that are fun to think about. That we were very self-serious at the beginning, which I think is also good and bad, but we were very when I graduated, I was very much like, my job is playing in Sō Percussion, and that meant rehearsing. We rehearsed really weird. We would rehearse 6 to 8 in the morning and 6 to 8 at night, because people had 9 to 5 jobs basically, but it was like, we do this, our parents asked you, what are you going to do after you graduate? I play in Sō Percussion, it's like, and we probably paid ourselves $75 a month or something at a certain point. We always paid us per month. It was always like, we're going to get a paycheck. And it just started off very small, and we built it up. And I remember when Josh Quillen joined the group, 2006, something like that. I think for him, the group had a reputation in the scene that he was in that felt like it was a big deal. And so we asked him to join the group, and he had toured with us for a while, and he said yes. And then it wasn't until the next day that it was like, wait a minute, what do you, and we told him how much he was going to make a month. And it was like, oh, I didn't just get a job. That's not a job.
I think it was when we had Bill Kahn on, we were talking about Nexus. I was like, so what did your parents think of this idea?
what I love, Ben, so Bill and all the Nexus folks we reached out to really early on, and they were amazingly supportive. And all of them said, like, we decided this was not going to be our job. And that was like kind of right after we had a discussion where we were like, this is going to be our job. And I was like, I think like, I don't know, for me, that's a cool reminder that like, there's not one path through this. Like they are extremely successful. They are a group that we look up to in just amazing ways. And they made the opposite choice than we did early on. You know, I think their choice was like, we're going to get jobs like with orchestras or through teaching that are going to be grounding in that way. And in that way, whenever we play with Nexus, it's not about money, it's about passion, you know, which I think is a pretty awesome way to look at it, you know. And we kind of said, oh, I really want as many hours of my day to be spent on this thing that I really love. How can I make choices that are going to push me in that direction? But there I think are pluses and minuses of both of those things, you know.
It's funny hearing like the history of how seriously you were taking it. This is like a weird fact to share, but I was introduced to Sō Percussion sometime around 2007, 2008 by my brother, who is not a musician, and he was an advertising and marketing major in college. And one of their projects, they had like 3 different things they could choose from, and they had to do like a marketing campaign for Sō Percussion or, you know, Swiffer or something else. Yeah.
Did they come up with anything good?
So yeah, I don't know. I feel like he might have gotten assigned Steinway, I think was his. But yeah, weirdly, Sō Percussion was used in advertising classes way early on.
I love that. Early on, somebody had written a book about the business of music kind of thing, and I'm not sure why we made this decision, but we made a decision early on that we were going to pay for our health insurance before we paid our salaries. It was like, that was something we were going to do out of college. We didn't, you know, this was pre-Obamacare, I think, things like you couldn't be on your parents' health insurance or whatever. And so we had made it into a book about a kind of business plan that included that. And I think that led to some strange projects, maybe like the one your brother was involved in, where people found out about us that probably shouldn't have known about us, but that's cool.
Well, Jason, to switch gears a bit, I would like to talk. Actually, no, sorry, we missed one part. How do you feel like the artistic vision of the group has changed over the past 2 decades? And you kind of touched on it a bit, but
I guess so. I mean, I think it's drastically broadened, you know, and I think, like I said, it's really weird for me to think of a time where I would spend so much time in Sō Percussion, and any of my drum set work, anytime I improvised, anytime I wrote music, would all be outside of Sō. That's just like a weird thing for me to think about now, that it would bifurcate like that. And so slowly, I think we found a way for all of our interests, not that we don't do other projects outside of Sō, but Sō encompasses many of those interests. So I think it's been a kind of slow move that way. And once you say that you can write music for yourself, once you're creative in that way, it's opened up a lot of ways for us to work with other people. You know, one of the first projects we did, I'm trying to think, maybe it was our, I don't know, 3rd or 4th album. We record way too much. It's really silly, the amount that we've recorded. But so our 4th album is like a very early album. But I was with this duo called Matmos. They were this electronic music duo. They're based in San Francisco at the time, and they've moved out to Baltimore. We were big fans. But it was so natural for them to say, like, yeah, let's do a show together. And so they said, oh, we're coming out to New York. You can play on these 3 songs of ours. What should we play on of yours? You know, that was like such a natural question for them to ask. And we were at this moment where I was just starting to write music, and it was just okay for that to be something Sō did. And so it was like, oh, well, I have these things you can play on. And that just opened up a door that never would have been opened before that, you know. So slowly, I think this project we just did with Caroline Shaw that we're really proud of, is like we co-composed a bunch of songs together, and once we were able to kind of broaden the way we worked, I think it's led to I don't know, some pretty exciting doors opening. So I would say, I mean, early on, I'm really proud of a lot of the work we did in our first 4 or 5 years, but in a lot of ways, it's funny to look at. It's very contemporary classical music driven, and we still love contemporary classical music, but it feels very like composer, performer, collaboration, clarity. And most of what we do right now, I think, feels a little bit more like like this, you know,
Or
for
homebrew,
better or
yeah.
worse, you know. Yeah, I think for us we feel better, but maybe your brother would have a really hard time writing an advertisement for it, you know, because it's kind of like, I don't know, they do a lot of this kind of stuff.
Well, now you're a real band, you know?
Yeah, and I, you know, maybe a little bit like that, you know, we've broadened like that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, now to change gears a little bit, I'd like to talk specifically about you, Jason, for a bit. Specifically your compositions, all of your works that I've heard just have this, the only way I can say it is like unique artistic perspective. It's so different from anything else, much in the same vein as I think David Lang captures a very unique perspective and writes music that hasn't been heard before. My students are currently working on your piece Extremes, which when I got the score, it was like, what am I looking at? For anyone that's not familiar, there's 4 people standing around one bass drum with some sort of tuned pipes, and you're expecting to get this score that looks like a score, and it's more of a set of instructions on how to play the piece in terms of here are the rhythms and here's the sort of process you go through. And all the rhythms are derived from city names where a consonant equals an 8th note and a vowel equals a dotted 8th note. And I mean, the first couple weeks we were just ripping our hair out trying just to read what was written. But then all of a sudden it just like clicks and it just works. And I think that's exactly how that piece should be notated. And I know that I think Victor notated that piece for you, but I think that that's probably how you conceived it. So could you tell us a bit about Extremes?
I love hearing all this because I worry about this moment so much, where maybe students or maybe a professor, you know, watches this video and Sandbox put out a really beautiful video of this piece and it's kind of rocking. And I feel like it's kind of like, oh, like Jason writes a lot of music. This one's kind of rocking. This would be really fun. And you get the score and you're just like, really?
Yeah, there's that Andy Akiho piece, Kare Kuranai, and it's the same experience where you get it, and actually in that piece he has written it all out. There's a version where he's written it all out, and there's the shortened sort of instructions version, and the shortened version is the one to use. It's impossible to follow it written out.
Oh, good. Yeah. I feel, you know, I've only had good experiences with this, but I fear this moment when people open up the score. So my into writing music, I don't know how similar your undergraduate, you know, experiences was. My undergraduate experience, I went to a conservatory that feels to me like it was a pretty open conservatory. I was in the jazz program, I was in the gamelan, it was like a lot of things happening, but it was very clearly like you were a performer or you were a composer. Like now I think there's a space that's much more interesting than that, where things are blurring. And at the work we're doing at Princeton, it's a much more blurred reality. At that time, it was very kind of separated and bifurcated. And so I was like a proud performer playing the music of my friends who were composers, you know, it was like that. And so it took me a while. I played in bands and I composed in bands because that's what you do. But I never thought of myself as a composer. And I had a very like capital C, lowercase c composer thing. I had some pretty like lame views about that. I've really kind of pushed those ideas aside now, but it took me a long time to say, oh, I'm going to write music. And so my way in was really strange. I'm really good friends with Steve Mackey, who's a wonderful composer. And just last night we were hanging out and I was telling the story to him again, which he was one of the first people to hear a piece that I wrote. And I had this quote. So they weren't city names, but it was this quote. It was a Martin Luther King quote. And I had made some music where I played some chords on the vibraphone and there was a drone and there was some noises. And I was just explaining to him the way the piece worked. And I couldn't use words like compose. Like I said, I made this piece, you know, it's like, so Steve, I made this piece of music. It was pretty fun. You know, I translated this quote into these sounds, you know, and he like really surgically asked all the questions. It was like, oh, cool. How did you decide this? And, oh, how did you decide which chords to use? Oh, and how did you decide? And he just surgically like made me answer all the questions that were just like, that's what composition is. Like you make choices. And you know what I mean? But I always needed something external to translate, you know? So for a long time it was words, these weird ideas, Ben, of vowels and consonants and translating them into kind of low and high sounds, very much comes from like kind of trying to abstract what drum grooves were. You know, I was playing in these kind of like weird improv settings where I would come up with loops, but they'd be kind of like weird loops to hear. But I would feel like, oh, the way you hear these loops are the low sounds and the high sounds. At the same time, I was studying some music in Bali. I went to Bali for a summer to study some music, and I was like, oh, all the grooves that are happening on these drums are kind of low and high sounds that are alternating. Like really kind of thinking like, oh, if I alternate low and high sounds, you get grooves. The English language is kind of weird. Like you can alternate, you know, consonants and vowels in weird patterns that are you can kind of find patterns there. You know, there's always gonna be more consonants than vowels, but so I just started to do all these weird things to words, and I sat in that space for many years, and came up with many weird pieces like Extremes. There's a piece called Life is Fill in the Blank, and Extremes are the two that have kind of like made it outside of So world, because all those pieces just kind of live in the shorthand, which for us I think makes it exciting, where it feels like they can change all the time. You know what I mean? They don't feel like they're kind of calcified, you know, and that to me, I think as a performer, I want to make music that feels like it's living and other folks can make choices with it, you know? So right now I'm actually completely infatuated with Sudoku matrices. I'm about to put out this big 2 double LP series of a solo up to a nonette of all Sudoku music. But if a student of yours, Ben, ever gets it, or any of you all order this music, half of the time, if you order the wrong piece, it's going to say, do a Sudoku. Like step 1, solve a Sudoku. Step 2, you know, because the idea is like you can take any series of numbers and turn it into this piece, you know, and I'm kind of excited about that. Like, hopefully every time you hear a piece, like you can hear that it sounds like me, even though it could be a totally different, you know, set of numbers that's making the piece. I'm kind of really interested in those ideas. So yeah, I'm glad your students are jumping in and having a good time with Extremes. I imagine I rarely, if ever, hear a bad performance of that piece, because I imagine students who would perform it poorly are just going to be like, I'm not doing this. This is stupid. Like, I don't want to do this.
I think it's also to a certain extent, it's one of those pieces, like, it's just so hard to get through that, like, if you are physically capable of actually getting through it, it's probably going to be a decent performance.
Totally.
Yeah, Caleb actually right now is working on a piece based on Wordle, I think. No, just
nice.
But you know, you're a like capital C, lowercase c composer like thing. It's funny, like, I think so many people get caught up in this idea of like, oh, like, if I'm going to be a composer, like, I need to know harmony. And like, that's certainly not a bad thing, but like, not, this sounds like an insult, and I don't mean it this way, but like, Extreme seems like someone that knows nothing about harmony. Like, write me a piece, and like, and it's amazing how incredibly different it is. And it brings to mind, like, Michael Colgrass had a great story about the first time he ever composed a piece. He was a student at University of Illinois in the 50s, and the percussion ensemble director said, "What'd you think of the concert?" He said, "Well, I thought they played well, but thought all the music was terrible." And so Paul Price, the professor, said, "All right, well, you write something then, kid." And so he did, and they played at their next concert, and he said, "I just walked outside and I saw like the spring flowers blooming and heard the birds chirping, and I said, I'm a composer." This is profound. Yeah, you wrote a piece. You're a composer. Yeah, it's not a big deal.
I've been thinking about the capital lowercase thing is pretty silly, but also like I've realized more and more that my time in Bali was incredibly important for me as a musician, like learning music in that way. You know, not written down, kind of learning it, no, you know, by rote over slow periods of time or long periods of time. But also the idea that, like, you know, yeah, harmony is not my my strength. But when I was in Bali, like amazing things would happen with 5 notes for hours, you know, and the different pieces would all use the same 5 notes, right? So it's not like, you know, I think it's amazing when composers have a really solid feel for harmony and do amazing things with it. But that's one way to make music, and there's a lot of ways to make music. So I think, like, you know, the capital C thing in conservatory got a little like, there's this way to make music and this is the way we're striving for, as opposed to like, there's a lot of ways to make music and where do you kind of run towards your strengths, you know? So that's been a way I've been thinking about it for a while.
Do you do wear a powdered wig when you compose though, right?
Yeah, I do.
No.
Yeah, I take off the hat and put on a powder wig. Yeah.
Yeah, everything's by candlelight, and you're just furiously papers
Candelabra.
fast. Yeah, we've. I feel like in the past couple of years working with students, it's always the people that want to write, trying to get them to improvise, and then the jazzers trying to get them to write. And it's just like I feel like once they started to figure out like, oh, improvisation is just spontaneous composition, and compositions just slow down improvisation. It's just like eventually once the light bulb clicks, they start writing some cool stuff, and it's always fun.
I
I
like
feel
that
like
way
it's
of thinking
sometimes
about it.
scary, yeah, but it's fun.
I like that.
Well, Jason, you mentioned your studies in Bali, and two of your teachers are two of my favorite musicians. Steve Gadd is my favorite drummer in the world, and Keiko Abe is my favorite marimba player in the world. And both these artists are so instantaneously identifiable by their unique musical vision. So how did you digest their teaching and turn it into your own artistic vision? And I think some of your other teachers as well, Robert Van Cise comes to mind, could also be incorporated into the question here.
Yeah, I think, like when I think of, I mean, maybe Van Cise is like this, but definitely I feel like Steve Gadd and Keiko Abe, like they're musicians that I think of their voice first before I think of their technique. And I mean, both of them have amazing techniques in their own ways or whatever, but none of my time with either of them was spent talking about technique. I mean, with Abe, it was almost comical. So my sister lives in Japan and has since 1989. She's 10 years older than me, and she pretty soon out of college got a job in DC, and then went to Japan to teach English and just has stayed there. So she lived in Kyoto forever, and now she's in Tokyo. So I when I was a junior, I guess 1997, I connected with John Beck helped me connect with Keiko Abe to go study for a summer, so I could live. I had a spot to live, and I took a ton of lessons, and it was amazing. It was like the first thing she did when I walked in. Like I learned every piece that was written for her that I could, and every piece that she wrote that I could learn. And I never had great technique, but I studied with a Musser student, so I had kind of Mussery, Stevens Mussery kind of technique. And the first thing she did was just put these like super heavy rock mallets in my hand, said, hold them here and here, and then didn't tell me anything else for the next 2 months about technique. It was, and like these mallets were like rattan and like so heavy on the end that
there's a lot of flop. Yeah.
Like it wasn't a choice to hold them. So it was like, okay. So it was just like, bloody blisters and no talk of technique, and it was amazing. Like everything she did just exuded everything else. But for her, I think like technique was like, I have to have enough technique to say what I want to say, but I need to know what I want to say first, And so like, I think I've always thought about it that way, where like both things are important, but like, if you have a ton of technique and you have nothing to say, like that's just kind of a drag, If you have a ton to say, like your technique's got to catch up to it, But the first real piece of music I remember playing for her was the Tanaka, the two movements, I guess.
Two movements, yeah.
Right? Bum, 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 bang, dang, 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 whatever. Like I had it all jamming. I was so pumped to play it for her. And she had a marimba like facing you. And she just started playing along, but not playing in unison with me, just like improvising her own counterpoint, and I was like a 19-year-old, 20-year-old, like, what's happening? Don't stop. I finally got to the end and I stopped, and she was just like, why'd you stop? And I was like, well, I got to the end, and she just kept playing, and it was like, it was amazing because it was like, for her, the music didn't stop. Like the music started before that and it kept going after that. And that piece of music was just something that happened in the middle. It was like everything was music. Which was just so profound to me, and kind of so amazing. And I guess Steve Gadd, in some ways felt different, but also very similar. Where, I mean, so when I got to Eastman, there was no drum set teacher there. I got in the jazz program. I was excited to study a double major. I got in the jazz program, and there was an amazing grad student who's my teacher my first year. Matt Aiken was possibly one of the best teachers I've had, but just a grad student who turned me on to it. Ton of approaches to the drum set, ton of music that I didn't know. And then they were looking for a drum set teacher, and Gadd had just decided to move back from Nashville to move home. He grew up in Rochester. And so it was just like, the local college just asked him to teach some drum lessons while he's in town, basically was the vibe, and he's like, okay, cool, whatever. And so I only probably had like 8 or 9 lessons with him before he went on tour with Eric Clapton. It's like, sorry, guys, Clapton called. But like, I remember all the first lessons, like all my drum buddies from high school would be like, hey, could you ask Gadd this? Could you ask Gadd this? And it was all like, how do you get your foot to go this fast to play a samba? Or like, how do you get your hand to do this fast? It was all these kind of like technically kind of things. And then, his answer was always just like, well, I don't know, I would just do quarter notes, or I would just do, like, it was always like, take the easy route, like not the easy route, but just like, why are you stressing, right? Like, why are you stressing about this? The music's over here and you're worried about this thing, So like, his lessons were always just like, we're going to play for an hour and you wouldn't stop. In fact, if you stopped, I guess it was like Abe, like if you stopped, he would just be like, why did you stop? But I don't know. I haven't seen Abe many times since I studied with her. I've seen her at Pickering a couple of times, but it was kind of a magical summer. I'm pretty grateful for both of those. I'm grateful for all my teachers, but those 2 teachers, I think like there was something about artistic voice versus technique that really spoke to me. And if anything, don't ever look at my hands if you ever watch us play, because that's not where I shine. Like, I have just enough technique to say what I want to say. I never spent much time thinking about it. I never had a teacher that spent a lot of time worrying about that, I guess.
I think that's very strange and very altruistic, but we rarely think of our vocabulary or of our tongue in the same way. Like, oh, but is my, speaking apparatus good enough for what I'm trying to convey? But I was gonna ask, I am so jealous. I've never had a chance to work with those people, and thinking more of, technique is, for me at least, not a very interesting conversation. But when it comes to time and sound color, who were the most exceptional people that you've ever been in the presence of or maybe studied with, if that was the case?
Yeah, that's cool. Time. I think Gadd would be like, all the lesson was just about that. Meaning you really would like, he has a rudimental thing. That, when Karli, when you were talking about like Simon and Garfunkel, I was thinking about, I can't hear Paul Simon and not think about Gadd, and like he would really be like, write a bar of a rudimental thing, and you would just start playing it on the snare drum, and then you couldn't leave it until it just felt great. And then once that felt great, he'd be like, okay, put a bass drum on beat 1. And then once that felt great, the hour would be done. No, but like, if it felt great earlier than the hour, then it'd be like, oh, do this. And you would just try to make it feel good enough for his sensibility that you could move on and try more things. And I think because you wanted to just try so many things, I started to just like practice. My drum set practice turned into just playing grooves for long periods of time and listening to like, how can I just listen to the snare drum until it feels really good? Or how can I listen to just the hi-hat until it feels really good? And I think that approach maybe now is happening, but that approach wasn't happening in the classical world so much, like feel or time, like just wasn't something that was talked about. And so I do feel kind of lucky to have that moment where both of those things were working together, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that I think really informs Sō's sensibility. I think I would say sound, like I think I do have to give Van Zyl some props about sound, because I think for me, like it was grad school, where I really started, like, if Gadd wouldn't let you move on until something felt good enough, like Bob wouldn't let you move on until like it sounded like you wanted it to sound, it'd be like, if you think it's sounding like this and it's not, it would be like he wasn't going to let you get around that, so I feel like a kind of intention of sound making was a little bit, that's what grad school was for me a little bit. And it's funny to think about, like, I don't know if, I'm sure you all have had some of these experiences too, where it's like, when I was in grad school, I thought I was going to be a certain musician that I'm doing in a lot of ways different things than I thought I was going to do at that time. The music we play is actually very different than the music we were playing in grad school or those kind of things. But like a lot of those things I learned were like these kind of core values or something. So I think for undergrad in the jazz program, it was kind of like time and groove. And I think sound making was maybe a grad school thing. Yeah, that's a cool question though.
Oh, thanks.
Well, Jason, I have to say, I didn't study with Keiko Abe or anything like that, but I did play for her in a master class once, and I had a similar experience. I was playing Dream of the Cherry Blossoms, and I was like 19 years old and so nervous and standing on stage, and there was a second marimba on stage, and she just starts playing with me, and I'm like, going through my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm playing for Keiko Abe, and then what is she playing? And do I keep going? Am I supposed to stop? Like, what's happening? And it was just like surreal, but to kind of understand that was her approach to it. Her approach isn't, here are the notes on the page and this is the right way to play it. I've had students work on Prism over the years, and there's this recording on YouTube of Prism of Keiko Abe playing it for, I forget, like some kind of business meeting, I think, like just a marimba performance, and it is not what's on the page. And so sometimes I'll have students that go and check that out, and they're like what?
Yeah, I love that. Karli. Like, thanks for sharing that, because it's bringing so many things to mind. For me, it's like a student of mine is playing Cherry Blossoms right now, and I always think of, it's like, for her, I really think she would improvise before that piece and improvise after it, and that is the piece dealing with that folk song that would happen in the middle, and so she wrote it down, but it's like, how do you deal with that with students, whereas like she just kind of transcends it all and can do anything on the instrument, right? Like, it doesn't actually matter if she's playing any of the notes. It's like so not about that for her as a composer. And so how do you translate that to students, or how do you think about that? But I love, actually, like, the Nexus, talking to Nexus, the first time they learned the rags that they play, what they decided to do, they would improvise these hour-long concerts, right? And that was their first like 7 years or something, were just like improvised concerts. And then one time they decided to play a rag in the middle of it. And so they would just improvise and improvise. And then when Bob went to the xylophone, like, they would go into the rag jam, and then they would go back into improvising. And it was just like, they started to build these shows where these pieces would show up in the middle of these improvs. And I mean, it's impossible for me to imagine a rag growing out of a free improv, but I just love that would happen on a show of theirs. And then the idea that just like composed music happens in that way, it's really exciting. And yeah, Abe definitely, like, she just like, she exudes music, you know what I mean? Like, you can't, it's just like, it's kind of exuding. And then when you listen to these other pieces by Japanese composers that kind of make up that repertoire, to think of that mindset with it is really powerful to me. It kind of feels like, depending on who the composer is, there's a different sensibility that you need to take to what notes on a page mean. The music I write, notes on the page mean something very different. There's 1,000 choices you can make with extremes that would be okay, and there are 1,000 that wouldn't be okay, but that's within like my sensibility and what my score shows you to do. And so getting in the mindset of thinking about other composers' music that way, I don't know, I feel like I learned that from, not that I learned that, I started to think about that with Abe, I think. Yeah, she's just one of those magical music makers.
I have a disappointingly boring question.
Love it.
You mentioned the Tanaka two. Pardon me for just nerding out for a second, but you mentioned the Tanaka two movements, which is like one of my favorite pieces, and like I was weirdly into that piece like way early on. How does she play the gliss in the second movement?
Oh man, I don't know. Well, do you mean, because isn't there like a rattan? Is it like a scrapey thing? You mean?
I think like in Japanese at the bottom of the page, I think it says to like scrape with the rattan as well as the mallet head. I don't know, but it sounds so cool how she does it, and it sucks when I do it.
I'm not sure I have anything genius, but I do feel like I learned that vibe from watching her do it. But she never played it for me because she played her own accompaniment to the piece.
Yeah. And yeah, Keiko Abe's works are obviously, just her own compositions are amazing works of art, but I think a lot of those early Japanese pieces, the Time for Marimba, Two Movements, Taurus 3, Conversation Suite, those are maybe undervalued in our repertoire these days.
Yeah.
So definitely worth
I think that's true.
checking
We've
out.
been teaching conversation a lot as like a first formality. There's just like a first, and there's so much interesting stuff in there. Absolutely. All
Yeah, and the thing I love about Conversation Suite is like all the movements, like the name of the movement sounds exactly like what the movement is. Like one of them is called Tender Talk, and it's just like,
yeah.
and I can't remember. There's one. I keep wanting to say A Little Spat. That's one of Casey's pieces, but yeah, there's like one about an argument also, and yeah, they all just sound exactly like the titles. It's kind of cool.
Nice. Love it.
Well, Jason, in terms of both you and Sō Percussion, your list of collaborators is just mind-blowing to me. I mentioned a few, but just to rattle off some of them before I stop myself: Steve Reich, Glenn Koche, Julia Wolf, Medeski, Martin and Wood, Steve Mackey, David Lang, Paul Lansky. The list just goes on. So you kind of touched on this a bit earlier, but can you tell us a bit about your vision when you collaborate with an artist, and sort of how do you blend your unique approach with the demands of the collaborator? And have you ever encountered a situation where you feel maybe the collaboration wasn't jiving so well?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, I feel pretty lucky. I feel lucky that David Lang was a first example of this big one, of a big kind of commission. And Paul Lansky wrote Threads for us really soon after, and also was just so kind of like generous and wonderful in the collaboration that it just felt like there was I mean, whether anybody else likes that music or not, like we feel very much like, oh, that was a really successful, like we spent a long time making this happen together, and it felt like a two-way street. And so I think there are definitely early collaborations that didn't work. Don't need to name any names, but not that many, I think. And I'm defining this by what we think works for the record. I mean, anybody can have any opinion on what works or not, but I think for the most part, we feel pretty great about our collaborations, because I think when we choose to work with somebody, for the most part, we've heard their music a lot. We've been on festivals together. We know something about the way they work, and we get the sense that there's going to be a really good chance of this working. There's like, whether they've written for percussion or not, like a lot of times it's not because they've written percussion music before. It's because like we see a sensibility in the way they work and an experimentation that they value.
I remember like reading someone wrote a blog post, one of the Sō members, I can't remember who, wrote a blog post about Paul Lansky and Threads. And I was like, he said, I don't write percussion music. You're like, well, but you do. Like, you don't know it, but you do.
Yeah. Well, that one, yeah. We were at a dance performance in New York where they had set Tables Clear. Do you know this album of his? He made all this amazing electronic music that's very percussive. And Tables Clear is an awesome record to listen to. And all the sounds are like his young kids just hitting stuff in the kitchen. And he kind of samples it all and then just makes amazing percussion music out of it. So it's like, no, Paul, like you've written a lot of percussion music. Let's do that together, So I feel like right now we're touring a lot of music. This beatboxer, vocal percussionist, Shota Talaferro, who's amazing. I had met him playing some of my music down in Baltimore, and it was like, okay, this is somebody who has a really interesting sensibility of the way to put notes together. What could happen if we worked together? We had played music together, so I knew he was a really generous human. We asked him to do a set on a series we have called Brooklyn Bound, and then it felt like, okay, this has a really great chance of working. Caroline Shaw, we've known for a long time, so it feels like she had written us a quartet called Taxidermy, and it felt like, okay, let's do more work together. And so I think we know her spirit, and we know that we're going to find, it feels like for us, like we are really trying to kind of stretch ourselves into new spaces, but I think we're still looking to like, I don't know, to have a pretty good statistical chance of feeling like we're going to make something great together, and like I said, just it's only through our lens is what we can say is great or not, but that we're going to spend a year together on a piece of music. Like we don't do things that are going to be quick things. It's like, let's take a year, let's get together, let's try sketches, let's try ideas, let's see what's working for you, what's not working for you, let's try things, let's throw things out, let's bring new ideas in, like let's really go back and forth until we feel like we have something that we're really going to tour for a long time. So I mean, I think we've done a lot of commissioning, but I look at a group like Kronos or something who's like, you know, commissioned 900 pieces or something. Like it's insane the amount of work they've done. And I respect the hell out of that. But in a lot of ways, we're not that. In a lot of ways, we're going to be like, we're doing 2 or 3 things this year. Let's try to do them. Like, let's spend a lot of time on them. Let's try to do them really well and do them in a way that's going to be really special for us and hopefully for the composer too, you know? And so I don't know, we're really trying to balance right now, like how to make sure we bring a lot of new voices into our scene, and also how to say, oh, we had a really great project with Caroline. Let's do another one. Like, let's figure out how to go deeper with folks who we already know we work well together with. You know what I mean?
This is something that I love about Sō and about so many people that I look up to, you know, in percussion and in chamber music. And I feel like it is sort of a rare occurrence in other instrumentalists. Now, I say this, of course, with a grain of salt, but there is something that I've learned, which is that it's so important to do things in the best way possible. Like, stop thinking about minimum requirement, but constantly think about how you can raise the maximum. And when you get a commission, it doesn't matter who it's from, whether it's your best buddy or it's an amazing composer. I mean, try your best to have no stone left unturned of ways in which you think about this piece and how long it's going to live with you, and spend as many hours with it. I really don't understand, and I do apologize. Of course, I won't name any names, but I get approached sometimes for, you know, little collaborations with people here and there who are not percussionists usually, who are just like, hey, I found this score somewhere, and do you want to play it? And I'm like, I can't find that music online. What does it sound like? I don't know. I'm like, do you know the composer? I don't know. Wait. I'm not just picking something up because it's for X and Y. I'm not interested in that, because I'm going to spend so much time doing this. And I feel like that is something that, of course, I didn't come up with. It came to me through watching people like you and seeing people like Ben and Karli when I went to school, and just constantly being like, whoa, like I've never seen anyone work that hard. Let me figure out what's the hardest thing that I can do. And that's something that I so percussion appreciate about.
I was waiting how long would it take for that pun.
It just comes so easily. The name kind of just asks
so easily.
Yeah, I know, it's everywhere. No, I agree.
Awesome.
I feel like going deep, you know, is important, and I think we like meaning digging deeper and deeper into the project that you're working on. And I think we have it a little bit lucky, as opposed to like a lot of students that we're working with. Like, we get to perform things over and over, so we're constantly putting them up in like workshop spaces, and then we're premiering them, but then we just keep tweaking and keep tweaking and keep tweaking, you know, as we perform them. So we just did a cool commission with this amazing composer and singer, Natalie Joachim. She's amazing, and the piece went really great on the premiere, and she sings these interludes with us when she's around. And when we tour it without her, we're trying to figure out, we just keep tweaking, how are we going to do this without her? Do we do it with pre-recorded interludes, or do we try it without that? Or what do we need to tell the audience to get them in? Or what can we change about the way we play it? Like, it feels like we're constantly tweaking it after the premiere. And so I feel like we're trying to just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into the work. And that's hard to do sometimes when you don't get, you know, multiple performances of things. But I feel like when we got on the scene in New York, it was so weird. This sounds like an old, like 44-year-old dude thing to say, like a middle-aged performer thing to say. But what it sounded like, the scene in New York in the 90s was so dark for new music, where people were just so pissed to be playing new things, that things would happen once and never happen again. And the composer was never hearing what their work actually sounded like. And the performers were just bummed. And like the whole thing was just like, why are we doing this kind of feeling? And it seems like once people start to really commit to things, wonderful things start to happen, you know, and so like I'm kind of grateful that the percussion scene is in that space right now, you know, where it feels like in a lot of ways it's a positive space where people are working really hard to make new things happen, as opposed to like a grumbly space, which was definitely like when we first moved to New York, the feeling was just kind of grumbly. And we were kind of like, no, but this is fun. Let's have fun working hard on music. You know, it's like, now I feel like that's more of a pervasive vibe of like a positivity about making new things happen, you know?
One of my favorite things I ever heard any of my teachers say, William Mersch said that one time someone asked him, what's your favorite marimba concerto? And he said, the one I'm playing right now.
Oh, nice.
And so it's like, yeah, what's your favorite piece of music? Or I always often turn the question around to my students as, what's the greatest piece of music ever written? It's the one you're playing right now. Like, and you know, you can reframe the question like, who's your favorite girlfriend? Like the one you have right now. There's, you don't have your current girlfriend, but another one that you like more somewhere else. Like that's not, you're not going to treat the one you have well if that's the case.
That sounds like a bad question to ask anybody.
Fun fact, I read this about David Friedman and Dave Samuels earlier, that they were asked, what was your favorite performance together? And they would say the last one.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I've never been on a podcast that has that. Like, I love this learning facts about the day thing. I'm so into this. It's like really, this has been really illuminating. Please keep them coming.
Yeah, a few weeks ago we learned that Chike 4 sucked at the premiere. It was people didn't like it.
Grumbly,
yeah.
Right?
Grumbly new music. Tchaikovsky wrote a 4th symphony.
I love that. Amazing.
Well, Jason, as we move toward wrap here, I wanted to make sure we talked about something that's actually kind of how we got in touch. Jason was sending out emails promoting his Sō Percussion Summer Institute, which is one of, I think, the most notable percussion seminars that happens over the summer. So what can prospective students expect to gain from the experience, and how can they apply?
Thank you for asking, Ben. Well, I'm gonna say something about it that I remember saying to the first class of, like, I don't know if we've been doing this like 12 or 13 years or something. And I was never someone who thought I was going to be a teacher. Like, I don't know where your all's paths went. I was someone who was just always thinking about being a performer and kind of didn't know that I loved teaching until the group kind of got into it. And now I love, me and Eric run the studio at Bard College Conservatory. And I love our studio. It's really exciting space to be. And for me, Sō is like this 2 weeks in the summer that's just like super kind of invigorating every time. It's kind of re-energizing. You know, it's like you go through a long year and you're like, you know, in the summertime, kind of you want to just be like, and then you have these 2 weeks that are just super power packed, where like, you know, 30, 40, 50 college age folks come, composers, percussionists, and just it's kind of like a laboratory, you know, and exciting things happen, and we feel that almost as much as the students do, I think. So we've been online for a couple years, which I think, you know, we made some lemonade out of lemons or whatever. It was cool, it was okay. We did a lot of kind of recording projects and a lot of kind of creative work like that, which was cool. But this summer we're back in person, which will be exciting. So I mean, maybe just reach out to me if anybody is listening to this right now and still wants to apply. We are looking for just, you know, folks who are up for experimentation. I think like when Sō describes what we do, we describe ourselves as playing experimental music as much as we describe ourselves playing any other kind of music. Meaning, whenever we work with someone, we're looking for something new. You know, and that can sound many, many different ways for us, I think. So Sō is a space where it's kind of 2 weeks of experiment. So if you are a percussionist who's looking for that kind of thing, please reach out. I'm easy to get a hold of. We all are in Sō Percussion. It's just my name, Jason at Sō Percussion.
David Lang at Gmail. Sorry.
Jason_Treuting, Jason.Treuting. I never just did David at bangonacan.com. You know, you should do Jason at SōPercussion.com. Yeah.
So wait, just to get it straight, what's your email?
Jason, that's JASON at SōPercussion.com. The slowest email shout out ever.
It's like you were putting the spaces that people put.
Exactly. Jason.
Spam bots don't,
Yeah.
blast their inbox.
Yep.
Oh man, yeah. If anyone else needs, I went to SoC.
Alum.
It was summer of, geez, it feels weird to say, like 2009, maybe.
You were early. Yeah, it was like
Like-
maybe year 2.
Yeah, I think it was year 2. Is a lifetime ago. It feels like, but yeah, it's funny. Like I specifically remember going in. That was my first year of wrapping up my first or second year of college, and have done the normal percussion stuff, drumline in high school and percussion ensemble and when band orchestra, whatever. But I remember Sylvia Smith did a spoken word, like really avant-garde piece. I remember being in the crowd, just like, what's happening? What's going on here? But then like totally getting it like at the end of the 2 weeks and like, all right, I get it now.
But were you, so this is when I mentioned earlier, I was talking to Steve Mackey last night about, I think what started our conversation off, were you there, Caleb, when Stuart Saundersmith spoke?
Yes. Yeah.
That was legendary. He told our students, and I kind of like, he told our students, he said, with a straight face, he said, if you write music with a pulse, you are a fascist.
Yeah.
All of us were like, oh my goodness.
Wow.
You put the draft for extremes away.
Caleb, do you remember, so Jeremy Malvin, who at that time went by Professor Purple and now goes by Chrome Sparks, who is more famous than any of us on this call, like writes like electronic music with it. And he was just livid. It led to like a lunchtime that I will never forget, and it was amazing because all at once I'm kind of like, okay, it's weird to invite folks into the space who are going to say something that you just disagree with so vehemently, but also it led to the most amazing discussions. It was like kind of like, yeah, we need to invite him back maybe.
Yeah.
It was wildfire.
Definitely, yeah.
I have a quick
Clickbait.
it was definitely clickbait. Yeah. I mean, Caleb, can I ask you a question really quick? Because when I think about SoC, I think about this web now of kind of alumnus we have out there in the world. Do you still know or come in contact with other SoC folks that you met that year? Or is it
every now and then? I mean, it was
a while.
Yeah, man, 13 years ago. That's crazy.
Yeah, you're too.
But so some of them, like I know, last time like Amy Garapik is, she's doing great things, and I know some other folks have gone into non-music avenues, and some are teaching, some are playing, some are overseas. So we all kind of spread out, but every now and then I'll run into some names, and it's like, hey, you remember?
Love it. We were year 2. Yeah. I love it. Yeah, we think of like the groups that kind of formed at SoC or that kind of stuff. More and more, that becomes some of the things that we're so proud of,
Yeah, no doubt.
Everybody knows someone who went to SoC. So even if you did not go there yourself, someone. So it's a good recommendation.
Kind of like a Kevin Bacon, 6 degrees.
Yeah, you have, I think, 1 degree of SoC.
1 degree of SoC.
Yeah.
So I am 2 degrees from Kevin Bacon.
Are you?
Just saying, I would win this game. I work with this choreographer who's amazing, Susan Marshall, and shout out anybody who's interested in this project that I was talking about. It's called 9 Numbers, the Sudoku music. And Susan, she choreographed a piece for me and my partner Beth. We danced this piece that she choreographed. She's a really wonderful choreographer, and she dated Kevin Bacon at Juilliard back in the 80s, I guess 80s. I'm not sure. Yeah. So that's small degrees of separation.
Wow.
Okay, well, do you do orders? Could you get Benedict Cumberbatch for me, please?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can do that. Yeah.
And he's been trying real hard to get Beyonce on the podcast. If you can make that happen.
Just call me back, please. Amazing.
Jason at what?
Yes. Beyonce at Columbia Records. I don't know. Beyonce at
Sō Percussion.
He seems like a Yahoo Mail person. Yeah. Well, Jason, thanks so much. It's been an absolute blast getting to chat with you. Thank you so much for your generous time, and we will see everyone on the next episode 320. Take care.
Amazing. Thanks for having me, you all.